voices, the 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 voices. We're going to move on to part 2 now, which is why do you do it? What made you get into music? You mentioned the hearing Metallica for the first time, but why do you? No, you can't eat the fucking paper. Why do you?
That's an edit.
Why do you do music? Why have you chosen this? Why have you chosen this particular style of music? Bud, you're gonna knock everything.
No, he
off.
was actually talking to you, Josh. He wasn't talking to JR.
I was
Don't
curious
eat the
about
paper.
JR's take on this as well. Simple answer is I don't really know. I do music mostly to satisfy myself at this point. You know, I play heavy metal. I've come to terms a long time ago with the fact that I was never going to be rich or famous as a result of my music. It's just the facts of life. You know, it's hard enough to make a living in music at this point in time anyway. And if you're going to try, probably that's the genre that is least appealing to the largest number of people. So I absolutely do it to satisfy myself. I love playing the guitar. Still really enjoy doing that. Still really enjoy jamming with my brother Dave, who plays drums for my band. And it's great when you get a couple of other like-minded musicians and you're all creating something. You know, you're down there, you're just jamming, and then something beautiful happens. You get those magic moments. And for me, that's a leading part of why I do it. Occasionally, I do find people who still, against all odds, happen to actually enjoy heavy metal, who stumble across my band and who actually talk to me about this and say, hey, you know, I really love the stuff that you're doing. And that's an added bonus when you find those rare gems of people who enjoy the same thing that you do, and you can share a couple of minutes just talking about that and saying, yeah, you know, I'm really glad that this resonates with you, or I'm really sorry that this resonates with you, depending upon what the topic is. And so hopefully that answers your question pretty well. Yeah, do it for myself.
And you know, that answer resonates with me as well, because that exactly the same for me. I'm into progressive metal. And you know, even when I put my first band together, started putting it together back in 2004 or so, I realized that the ultimate quote unquote success would really only amount to the possibility of getting invited to festivals a few times a year, still having a day job, and maybe getting, if we're lucky, 10,000, maybe 20,000 fans around the world. So you'd never really have a fan base anywhere. But alas, we probably never got to 50 fans or 100 maybe. But it was the process for me, the creative outlet, and the fact that you could create something that basically ends up being something completely new, possibly greater than yourself. Starting out small, working on something, building it, especially with other musicians, collaborators, and this thing turns out in the end in a form that you never imagined at the beginning of the process. And it's just like, wow, we did that. And it's just that kind of feeling. And then, like you said, it's just icing on the cake if somebody else goes, hey man, I really like what you're doing.
I started writing. Now I don't write music. I don't play any instruments. I don't, you know, write lyrics or anything like that. But the stories and poetry that I write, I started in 2006, and it was pretty much the same. Writing, just I had ideas, so they were in my head, and to get them out of my head, I had to put them on paper. And you know, people started reading them, and they enjoyed it. And a lot of people would get different meanings from it than what I actually meant it to be when I wrote it. And it was pretty cool listening to how they interpret it. But even just the fact that they liked it, was cool. Which it wasn't really. Even when I did the music promotion, I always had this idea like, oh, this will be like a big company, I'll be able to do this. This is how I'll make a living, because I enjoy music, or at the time I enjoyed music. I enjoyed learning about it and working with it. And I admit, I had no idea what the hell I was doing. And luckily I had people around me, Mike being one of them, and a few other people that were able to help me. And without them, I wouldn't have been able to have done any of it, but it was really cool just to be involved with it. And I enjoyed it. That's why I did it. And you were mentioned with your music, Josh, that having like a fan base, and you're okay with just doing it for yourself. When I first met you and first started seeing your band play, whether it was one of the shows that we were putting on or somewhere else, I always thought that you guys were super talented, and you had what, as far as talent goes, you had what it takes to actually put your music out there and, make a living. Maybe not, to the level where you're making millions of dollars a year, and playing huge festivals all over the place, but at least to have some kind of earn some kind of living doing it. Just depending on how far you guys wanted to go and how dedicated and how much you were able to push yourself to get out there, to get in front of people. But talent wise, and even now, like when you had reached out to me a few weeks ago with the new album, I thought it was kind of strange, because I've been kind of wondering, like, hey, are you still doing music? Is your band still together? Because I haven't heard anything about it. And I haven't done anything with music promotion in over 10 years. Actually, no, it's been about 10 years now. But just not seeing it on social media, I wasn't sure if you were still doing it. And then out of the blue, it's like, hey, listen to this. Like, answers that question. And it's still the same, where it's still good. The talent is there. And, it would be nice if, whether you want to make a living with it or not, or if you're just doing it, why do you try eating everything?
It
Just
would
doing
be
it for
nice
yourself, it'd be nice for other people to be able to see it and to
to be
hear
exposed to a
and experience it.
wider audience.
Sure. Well, first, thank you. I appreciate that feedback. It always means a lot when someone comes to me and says something like that. And I mean, Mike, I'm sure, has dozens of stories about this, but it's so hard to find people who are in alignment, who want to do exactly the same thing that you want to do with music.
Yes.
And that's really been a big struggle here. And even in large part, the reason for so many delays before us actually releasing a full-length album. I had to get to the point where I finally said, I'm not going to bother trying to recruit anybody else. I'm just going to play everything myself. And I did. And now we've got an album, and I have even less respect for bassists than I did before. So, it's confirmation bias, which is fun. I'm sure we'll talk more about that later. But
you wouldn't turn down John Mayung if he wanted to play bass for you.
Absolutely not. I can't do that and guitar at the same time. I'm not that good.
Well, you're gonna knock stuff over. Stop stepping on everything. Lay down.
I did actually have fun playing bass. I did actually have fun playing bass. It was a very different type of instrument than what I'm used to. I thought because it's got strings, it's basically a guitar. That's not totally true. It's much more rhythmic. You're really feeling, okay, the groove, and you're trying to pick that out. I still played it probably more like a guitarist than most bassists would, but sorry. That's why there's two-hand tapping.
Yeah.
One of the stories that I have heard about Black Sabbath when they first formed, Geezer Butler was a guitarist, and Tony Iommi didn't want another guitarist, and so he had to play bass. Geezer Butler did, and he couldn't afford a bass, so he actually restrung the the strings opposite and played it that way. Is that
Interesting.
any kind of truth could be to that? Like,
Okay, that sounds like that's what you do when you're a left-handed player as opposed to a right-handed player. And you right-handed guitars, especially back in the late 60s when they were around, every guitar was basically a right-handed guitar. And Jimi Hendrix was the one that everybody knows. He was too poor to be able to afford the extra money that it cost to have Fender make a left-handed model, because they didn't really have a production for left-handed models. So he turned the right-handed guitar upside down and restrung it so he could play it left-handed.
That was my awareness also. I'm not familiar with the Geezer Butler story, although musicians being what they are wouldn't totally surprise me. I just would have trouble picturing a guitar that could accommodate bass strings.
Right.
I was under the impression when I heard the story or read it that they were still guitar strings, just
Okay.
Upside down.
Okay. I'm not going to question it. I may Google it later.
Yeah, you're in trouble.
It's a story that I've heard a long time ago, and like I said, I don't know if it's possible to do it that way or how true the story is, but it's one of the stories, and I figured I'd ask musicians because I'm not a musician.
Fair enough.
Let's see. The inspiration. Moving on to part 3.
The voices. 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 The voices.